goddamn you f/22. So here I am out with the Bronica again. I haven't actually been to the forest for quite a while, and it's still quite green and lush. Quite difficult to isolate interesting shapes and compositions in amongst all this greenery, so I'm going to have to work quite hard. Now, something that did catch my eye was this tree leaning off to the left here. Now what really grabbed me was the fact that it is a narrow path leading up to it, so I've placed my camera quite low for a change because I wanted to include some of these foreground ferns. Now, with the waist level finder on the Bronica, it's very easy to get these low level compositions. I don't need to bend down and hurt my back. Squinting through a little viewfinder, I can look straight down at that wonderful square 2¼ inch format, and it's relatively easy to line up these compositions, but there are some technical challenges here using medium format. Well, first off, there is my choice of composition now with my camera located here, and there being some interest in the foreground here, which I must have sharp, and there, and going off to the distant tree, which also must be, I think, sharp. I don't think that can be soft. I have got challenges with depth of field, and of course I have no movements in my camera to compensate for this. So it's a case of using f/22, which is pretty much my go-to aperture in the forest. Now, a few people have asked me about using f/22 on my lenses, and does it cause diffraction? Well, the answer is yes, it will cause diffraction, but the more important question is, does that diffraction have a really detrimental effect on the final image? Well, for me, my 80mm Zenson, my standard PS model lens, is very good at f/22. I've had this tested many times by using such small apertures in forests, large open spaces with mountains in the distance and clear sky, so I get plenty of resolution in there. There's no doubt there's a slight drop off over the likes of f11 and f16, but for my purposes it's negligible. Now, the answer isn't the same for all my Bronica lenses. Now, I've got two particular examples here. This is the 150mm S, the earlier model. Now, this again is fine, stop down to f/22, and I think, yeah, it only goes to f/22. The later one goes to f/32. That's absolutely fine. However, I'm a little bit more reluctant to stop down my wide-angle lenses, such as this 50mm PS, because there is a noticeable difference at f/22 over f16. Not too bad with this one, but the early 50mm S looks awful at f/22, and I'll never use that aperture with it. So enough of the talking, let's get back to the actual shot. Right, f/22. I want that, and all that in focus. Well, sorry to interrupt here, but I was just editing this video, and I thought to myself, there's absolutely no way I'm going to get that foreground fern in focus and have the tree focus as well. I don't know what I was thinking, but this was borne out when I eventually developed the film, as you'll see here. So where am I going to focus now? Scale focusing on these lenses. Yes, you can use the depth of field markers, which are a good indication, but personally I am going to focus. Let me show you where I'm going to focus. I am going to focus on this little twiglet here. Now, that will be obviously pin sharp because it's the thing I'm focusing on, but I reckon, based on experience and also the depth of field scales, that will give me sharpness on these ferns here and also a sharp tree in the background. It's a little bit of guesswork, but I'm pretty certain it'll come out more than acceptable. Now, the exposure was set to 4 seconds and 8 seconds at f/22. That gives me plenty of shadow detail in the tree at the back of the frame, and I'm also compensating one extra stop there for the use of the yellow filter, which hopefully will give me a little bit more separation in these greens. It's probably not going to make a massive difference, but it will lighten them generally in contrast with the background. Now, a quick point about the digitization of this image before we get started. I made this copy using my Panasonic G9, a micro four thirds camera, using the high resolution mode. This gives around about a 40 megapixel image, and more importantly, this has not been sharpened in any way. This is a raw capture straight out of camera. Now, as you can see, I failed to get the depth of field sufficient on the near fern. But anyway, let's move on to the general sharpness of the image taken at f/22. Now, as you can see here, there is plenty of sharpness across the frame. I don't think it suffers particularly from having the smallest aperture selected. I think any real losses are going to be covered up by the film. I don't think I've got the resolution in the film to really embarrass the lens at f22, and it's certainly something I'd be happy to print at 20 inches. So for this particular shot, f22 is more than adequate. Now this one is another example of where I'm using f22 and I need f22, and I'm not going to compromise the shot in favour of potentially a little bit more sharpness with f16. So let's walk through this composition, shall we? So firstly, we have the obvious contender, the star of the show. We have the fallen tree with all these lovely broken branches on it, which I just decided to sink into the bog. Let me just retreat. Yes, completely wash my boots when I get back. Oh dear, maybe I won't walk you through this composition. It's just worth mentioning this area has something known as quaking bogs, and they are basically areas of leaf litter, branches and mosses which grow out over small areas of water, and they form a raft which is usually quite spongy, and you can feel it coming when it's about to give way, but today it gave way straight away. So I'm going to talk you through from here. Okay, that is the very end of the composition. There's a very dark shadow down underneath there, which I'm metering for because I want detail in that. There are leaves arching around across the frame, which are going to be in the frame. So I have focused on this particular set here. They have to be sharp. If these are blurry or soft in any way, it ruins the image. However, if that distant tree trunk there is slightly soft, it won't make much of a difference. But I do want everything in focus and sharp if I can, so I am going for f22. And I've taken one shot at, let's talk to you straight, I've taken one shot at 8 seconds. 8 seconds with a yellow filter, plenty of detail there, but I'm going for 16 seconds as well, because there is reciprocity failure with these Ilford films. I may even go for one, believe it or not, at 30 seconds. 30 seconds at f22 on quite a bright morning, which is really going to lift those shadows. And because I'm using XP2, it won't blow the highlights. Well, I chose 16 seconds in the end. That gave me plenty of shadow detail. And unlike the first one, everything I need to be in focus is in focus this time. That's actually, I think, a better composition as well. Now, looking at the detail in the centre, no issues there whatsoever with f22. And also the edges, I'm quite happy with these edges. I mean, you know, the resolution, the detail I'm capturing is fantastic. Now, this is without any clever post-processing. You know, I could be applying all sorts of sharpening and tools to this if I needed to, but again, a 20-inch print would be fine, and even a big darkroom print wouldn't show any real degradation, and it'd be perfectly adequate for my purposes. Now, you may be asking yourself, or screaming at the screen, saying, look Steve, why didn't you take one at f16 and maybe f11 and show us the results alongside your f22 shot? Well, I'm not going to do that because I'm not really a testing sort of channel. I don't really want to do those comparisons if I can help it. I don't mind showing how well certain things work and techniques, but I'm not really into that whole side-by-side comparison thing and pixel peeping. Sorry, where were we? I was just fighting off the squirrels. Yes, my tolerance for sharpness is quite. I've got quite a lot of tolerance for sharpness, put it that way. I am not super bothered about sharpness in images. They have to be sharp enough. And once they're sharp enough, I'm happy. And if there is a bit of tail off in terms of quality, as long as the image is strong and as long as I have everything I want in focus, I will tolerate that. So the way I find out whether I will use a particular aperture with a particular lens or format is through day-to-day use. Empirical testing, real testing, not listening to other people's opinion or YouTubers, heaven forbid. So I go out and I shoot and I spot patterns and I think, wow, why is that looking a bit soft? And why is that lens in particular looking very sharp at certain apertures or at certain subject types? You know, it's really crisp and clear. And you begin to get a feel for these things because it will depend on what you shoot. I mean, here I am in very dense woodland with lots of fine detail. Now, if you're out shooting a wide open seascape with lots of beach, etc., then you won't really need the same levels of sharpness you would maybe here because there isn't any fine detail in the image. And the sky, you don't really want the sky super sharp. I mean, there's nothing super sharp in the sky anyway. Clouds aren't sharp. So it all depends what you're shooting, where you're shooting, and how you shoot it. I'm now going to look for my final shot because I think I did mention a thing I like to do when I come out and shoot, which is typically with my medium format cameras, I like to get 3 shots. I'm almost obsessed with getting 3 shots these days out of a roll. Just feels balanced, I feel good about it. Very often if I take less than that, I just feel a bit like I've missed out on something. So I am going to hunt down that 3rd shot, and it's not raining like last time, and there aren't any killer sheep, but there are the squirrels. So hopefully I'm going to get it. I am going to get that 3rd image, if it kills me. Right then, just to prove that I can use lenses other than the 80mm, which is by far my favourite in the forest, got the 150mm on. No surprises at f/22. Okie dokie, here's the composition. It's a long shot. I have this fallen tree, this trunk here in the foreground. I have this tree going off up the side, and I have a nice little sapling in the middle, and I want it all to be in sharp focus. So once again, f/22, no fear, and I've taken it at 4 seconds and 8 seconds. It's gone a bit duller though, so I'm just going to give it one at 16 seconds. Again, there's no real highlights in it, there's no sky in it, so no problem blowing out, not with XP2 certainly. No wind today thankfully, so no movement as I'm making the exposure. If I was limited with wind movement, I would have to use a small aperture, or I would have to accept a bit of movement, which I don't mind too much to be honest. Job done. Well, once again, quite happy with the composition and the overall exposure. Looks plenty sharp enough to me even at this distance, but going into the centre first, absolutely no complaints about this whatsoever. It's as sharp as I could ever want a film image to be. It's just pin sharp to be honest, and working out to the corners again, plenty of fine detail in there. This is quite an enlargement, this would be a big print. And down in the bottom right, again, totally happy with that. Sharpness everywhere. So there we go, 3 shots in the bag, all at f/22. Just in time as well, the sun's come out. Now, you might think that's not a bad thing, but it does get a bit harsh in the forest, a bit sort of whitewash. And I do like the open shadows you get with a little bit of overcast sky in there. So, thank you very much for watching. Maybe I'll return in a week or two and bring the 35mm equipment and see if diffraction spoils the smaller format. Who knows? So, let me know what you think, and I'll see you again soon.